Welcome to Inclusion from the Start. I'm so excited to have our second episode of our vlogcast. My name is Emily Ropars. I'm an inclusion specialist with Early Choices. We are the Birth to Five Inclusion Initiative here in Illinois, and I have two guests with me that I'm going to have introduce themselves. So, Jani.
Well, thanks, Emily, and thanks for inviting us to join you. I'm Jani Kozlowski. I'm an author and a technical assistant specialist with the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I'm going to turn it over to Alissa.
Thanks. My name is Alissa Rausch, and I'm super happy to be here today just to have this conversation with these amazing minds. And I'm out of the University of Denver at the Positive Early Learning Experiences Center. And I work on the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center as well as have some grants and contracts. But all my work focuses on inclusion. And I even like to say inclusion and belonging for young children and their families and the providers who serve them.
I love that. I love that. So we're going to get right into it. We have a couple different topics we're going to talk about. And the first big kind of broad topic we're going to talk about is how being included in early childhood has lifelong impacts. So I'm going to turn it to you, Jani.
Yeah, so, I think we're so fortunate in our field to have guidance and leadership at the federal level, at the state level. States are doing some great things, and at the community level, some really cool things happen in classrooms across the country, because we are really seeing early childhood inclusion catch on. And we know that it benefits children with and without disabilities, and it benefits educators, and it benefits systems. And that comes from a sense of belonging and membership, positive social relationships, friendships, and development and learning, so children can reach their full potential. And so I really love the joint policy statement that the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services put out back in 2015, and they're updating it now. So we should be seeing that pretty soon. Hopefully, we'll be seeing an updated version. But I think it's, the sentiment and the main theme is the same. That we just know from the research that inclusion benefits children with disabilities and without disabilities, and that through holding high expectation and intentionally promoting participation in all learning for children, participation in social activities, providing individualized accommodations, and using evidence-based services and supports, that all of those things leads to lifelong positive outcomes. We see huge gains. And I love this quote from the policy statement itself. It says, "Inclusion that begins in early childhood programs is likely to continue into schools, places of employment, and the broader community. Inclusion in early childhood programs can set a trajectory for inclusion across the life course, making it critical that we include individuals with disabilities in all facets of society from birth." So it reminds me that inclusion in early childhood leads to inclusion in elementary school, and then inclusion in middle school, and then inclusion in high school, and inclusion in life. And so I love that sentiment, and I love the fact that, as early childhood professionals, we have the chance to really have an impact on the lives of children and families, and to support such a worthy goal.
Yeah, that just, I keep thinking as you were talking, inclusion isn't a place, right? And we talk about that a lot in early childhood. And so it has to be everywhere where kids are. And we know that kids are in school, that they're in their communities, that they're in their, their faith communities, they're in at grocery stores. And I think when we as educators or as providers of early care and learning start with how do we create the spaces here where children are, that really starts to set the stage for all those other places as well. So we're not just creating a place, we're creating a culture or a way of being that children and families and every participant in the community sees as the way in which we should live life together. And I think that's a really that is a worthy, as you said, a worthy sentiment. I think one of the things that makes it somewhat challenging is that we do have a lot of biases and ways in which we've experienced disability, either as a person with a disability or as a person without a disability. And sometimes that creates a lens that blurs our ability to get to that place of what is a worthy cause. And we talk a lot about the iceberg. What do you see above? And then all these things that are below. And in 1976, Hall did this design around the iceberg. And there's one for racial equity and things like that. We also have developed one for disability and ableism and anti-ableism. And what we know from this iceberg is that what we see at the top are those sort of, well, I mean, I'm almost going to say socially acceptable, right? They're the ways in which we talk within our society where nobody would say that's not okay to, or where people might not say that's not okay to do that. You see on the iceberg that's here, really, we call it overt ableism, right? In the sense that it's very clear, it's easy to see. And we have on there, the things that you see are things that we are more willing to say, you can't do this anymore, right? Like you can't say that. And you see some examples there of things that we might all commonly say, you can't do this. But what is below the water there, that subtle ableism, is stuff that interferes with children, families being able to access the community in an inclusive way and build that sense of belonging. And those things can be very subtle, and they can be things that we say or that are part of the culture that are not necessarily called out on. And so I think that we need to recognize that there's both of these pieces to how we see ableism and what acts as barriers for children with disabilities in our communities to really access that very worthy cause that you talked about, that everybody be a participant. And so being very aware of what it is we're saying, how we're saying it, how we're engaging with others is an important piece that we need to remember.
Absolutely. I think you're so right. I love that image with the iceberg. I think that really resonates. And, your point about the language that we use, I wonder about this term disability itself. It's basically a term that we've created as humans to sort people into categories of abled and disabled. And it kind of makes this assumption that a person with a disability has no ability at all, which of course is completely untrue. And it assumes that the person with a disability, it doesn't allow the fact that we all need help in some aspect of our lives. And so recognizing that concept of disability is something that's entirely dreamed up by society. And when you kind of look at the notion a little more closely, it falls apart. If doing something in a different way doesn't have to imply that it's the wrong way to do it. In many cases, the ability to act, behave, interact, or accomplish things in different ways or unique ways is celebrated, right? But disability assumes that the individual is unable to navigate the world in an acceptable way, when in fact it's about navigating the world just in a different way. You know, my husband has an impairment. He's unable to hear out of one ear, and in a crowded restaurant, he can't hear at all. But in a quiet setting, one-on-one, his ability to hear is mostly unimpaired. And so, you know, we see in disability, oftentimes situational. Sometimes children with attention issues can focus intently when they are engaging in an activity that they really are interested in. So, I mean, it's never as fixed or as obvious as some might think. And that said, most people with disabilities, including me, prefer to use the term disability rather than the term special needs. So special kind of implies that we have needs that are different than others. We don't have special needs, we have human needs. And when we regard children as having special needs, it's not a far jump to believe that they will then need to be segregated from others in a special classroom or special environment. And as you said, special education is a service, not a place. And so children really don't need a special place just because they need special, you know, a service or a support. So, you know, all of that, I think, is kind of tied up in this concept of inclusion. And when we think about what we can do as educators, you know, we have the ability to facilitate conversations, to think about learning environments in different ways, to consider the physical learning environment and the social learning environment, you know, the vibe of the environment, as well as the temporal learning environment, the kind of the pacing of the day. And so I think inclusion is definitely, as you said, kind of this worthy goal and something we are working toward, but it isn't always easy. And I think as educators, sometimes it's difficult to navigate all of that and to really know what to do.
Alissa, do we have some ideas you'd like to share about how to affirm identities in early childhood classrooms? Because I think, you know, you've laid it out so well about the context that we're all existing in. Some things we're cognizant of, some things we're not, but what can we do? What can we do as educators in our classroom to affirm the beautiful diversity we have in our classrooms?
You know, I was just going to say, Emily, as Jani was talking, a number of years ago now, I had the opportunity to visit in a classroom where a teacher was talking about hair, which very much, Jani, you know, is again a construct. Like it's this, we sort people by short and long hair or by curly hair. All these things they're random categories, right? That we as society do. And there was a situation in the classroom where a child had long hair, and there were gender assumptions made based on the fact that a child had long hair, meaning that girls have long hair and boys have short hair. And that was sort of this constructed understanding that was present in the classroom. And so children were asking, why does this child have short hair? Why does this child have long hair? When they should be in, because they maybe weren't in those categories, right? That had been traditionally sort of known to them. And so the teacher just had this really nice way of sitting at a circle and showing lots of pictures of people's hair, right? From across the world. What does it mean to have braids? What does it mean to have curly hair, short hair? Look at all these different varieties. And that actually hair is just one representation of who we are as part of our identity. It's not our complete identity. And so therefore your hair can be different or in some way additive to those other parts of our identity, including gender, including how we dress, all of those sorts of things. And I think that it really served as a really nice example to really be able to say, our hair is just one aspect of who we are. The way in which we might speak or walk or demonstrate our learning are also one aspect of who we are. And so to be able to very easily and smoothly lean into describing how those things are different, but what they mean and what they don't mean, was really a tremendously important experience for these kids to have. And you saw them really processing like, oh, I guess some people have long hair, some people have short hair. It's hair. And it doesn't say anything more than that. And I think that that's a really valuable lesson for us to learn about what we can about different people, and really leaning in and acknowledging it was I think the greatest gift that the teacher gave them.
I love that. It's pretty cool, to find innovative ways to help children, to make sense of the world, because it comes from that place of curiosity and wondering, and as adults, we have these biases that developed over time that we might not even be aware of. What do you think as adults we can do, not only in working with children, but in thinking about our own biases?
That's such a great question that I think it's important for everybody listening to ask themselves, right? What do I know about my own biases? What have I seen, say, in the media or in my experience about people with disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and how does that inform what I think they can do now, right? Or in this space, or what might their limitations be? And I think those are really important questions that we continue to ask ourselves, because as we know, those biases might cause us to not ask about knowledge, or to ask children to demonstrate knowledge, because we might be making an assumption that they don't know it, right? So if I already have this assumption that somebody with an intellectual disability can't read, why would I ask them about their alphabet? And that's a big mistake that's driven only by bias, right? Only by our experience and maybe what we've seen or read. And so I think it's important that we are constantly asking ourselves, why do I think this modification or accommodation needs to be in place? What's driving that? Is it that the child needs it, or is it that I have a bias that thinks that the child can't do that? And how do I really reflect on all of those things to make sure that I'm providing an experience that really does affirm their identity? And I think that we have to be reflective as providers too, in our own biases. And also in that when we challenge ourselves to think in a different way, it is uncomfortable. And quite frankly, we don't like to be uncomfortable. And yet that is something that we really need to be able to do in order to do this well. We have to look at some of those biases directly face to face and say, this is not working, or this is blocking me from being able to really access or create an environment for children to access. And so I think that is definitely something that we can do about just to help children affirm identities.
It sounds like from both of your perspectives, everything that we're talking about is the work of adults, right? Setting up the environment, reflecting on our own thoughts and feelings and reactions to things, and being intentional about providing space in the classroom for kids to explore their own natural curiosity, helping them to understand the world. And the way that we frame those conversations can either be an invitation for them to be accepting or even more curious about their friends in their community, or it could close things off. So we're in a really powerful position of kind of reframing the way children are viewing the world, or setting them up for success to be curious and accepting friends to their kids in their classroom, to the other kids in their classroom.
Yeah, Emily, you're just making me think about certainly early childhood, but the field of special education, we collect all these data, right, about outcomes. We collect what are children able to do across different developmental domains, and we report out on that. We don't always ask, or I wonder if we ask enough, are children's identities being affirmed in this space, and by whom and to what degree, right? And I think that when we spend a lot of time looking at data, I think it's important that we ask ourselves whether or not those data exist and how we would know that. And I think we're so good about maybe sitting in conferences with families and saying, here's this goal and objective, and your child met this here, and they met it X amount of times, this criteria, and now we're ready to move on to the next one. Or, those are the conversations that we're having. But are we having conversations with families where they're really able to say, my child doesn't want to come to school and I'm a little worried about why. And, or my child is sharing these experiences that are happening and I'm not sure how we might be able to repair that, right? Like, and I think that those are important data points as well that really get to the heart of not, are we checking the box of things that goal and objective met? This is the compliance. This is all of these things, but really getting at that rich definition that Jani, you said around what is inclusion. And I think it requires us to make sure that we're looking at data and seeking data that tells us whether or not children's identities are being affirmed in the classroom.
Well, I was thinking about what this really looks like in the classroom. And I think, Alissa, your example from the teacher that was talking about hair as and noticing differences in hair. I think that's a really good example of what we can do to lift up the things about us that are similar and the things about us that are different. We can read books that show examples about people with different abilities, as well as different cultures and different traditions around the world. We can teach children greetings from other countries. For example, you might say to the group, did you know that in India, people bow and put their hands together like this and say namaste when they greet each other? Did you know that? And I tried that out with my preschool next door neighbor. And he was so excited to learn that. He said, should we do that? He calls me Miss Jani. He said, should we do that, Miss Jani? Should we greet each other that way? And, it really builds the curiosity that children have innately. I'm thinking of this other strategy of during morning circle time, you might pass a mirror around and ask children to share one thing they see about themselves when they look in the mirror. Now, if you have a child that has a vision impairment, this is not a good strategy, but making the assumption that all of the children in your classroom are seeing, but you can ask them to notice that. And because part of respecting differences is also about finding similarities and being open about it and talking about differences and similarities. For example, to your hair color or hair example, Mila and Xavier have different hair colors, but they both like to dip their cookies in milk at snack time. So thinking about the things that are the same about us and the things that are different about us and how we can be friends. And, it reminds me of what you've been talking about, Alissa, around belonging and thinking about belonging as a way to approach social emotional development in the classroom. Can you share more about that?
I love all the strategies. And I was sitting here writing down like reminders to myself of ways in which I need to connect with other people as an adult. Even, of course, we should be doing these in the classrooms because this is such a good way to honor one another as adults. And it's basic to relationship building, right? Like everything that you described. And without without sounding too Pollyanna, I guess I would say that boy, what the strategies that you described would go a long way in this world, right? And I wish it didn't have to just boil down to be kind, but like that is, I think what you're saying is encouraging folks to recognize and take the perspectives of others, and that really goes a long way in helping people individually be comfortable with who they are. Very powerful. I will share an example that I owe entirely to my friend and colleague, Dr. Jackie Joseph, who shared with me a couple of years ago and has shared with a number of people through her keynotes and her sessions, The 10 Dimensions of Belonging by Eric Carter. And actually, Eric Carter is a theologian, but he has looked at what does belonging look like for people with disabilities. And he's created this beautiful wheel. And it really, if you look at it sort of and read it like a clock, what it demonstrates is that there are different dimensions of belonging. Sometimes when you belong, you really are just present with other people. Sometimes you're invited to join something and you may be there, but it's another dimension to feel welcomed, right? And so really, as you look at this wheel and you look at it clockwise, you see that there is this increasing level of complexity or depth to the nature of the belonging, all the way through I'm accepted, to I have a friend and it's like a reciprocal situation, to actually it is important that I am in this space because there's nobody like me in this space and I need to be here representing it, to being loved. And Eric Carter really does talk about the quote that you gave early on, that it's a human need, it's not a special need, that actually being loved is a very ordinary need, right? That is something that everybody needs. It's not a special need. And Dr. Joseph was struggling to get sort of this idea of affirmation into the classroom. And so they actually started to look at how do we bring dimensions of belonging into an early childhood classroom? How do we talk about what does it mean to be invited? What does it mean to be a friend? What does it mean to be welcomed, right? And then what does it look like to be loved? And as they can talk through those, the kids build their understanding of, oh, this is more than just I'm working next to this person, but this is something that really is a deep relationship. And what does it mean? And in doing so, children develop empathy for one another, and children build those skills that we would love them to have as adults moving forward into their lives, and build that culture again of belonging and understanding. And I wanted just to throw that out there because I think we get so kind of stuck on building on, sort of friendship skills, but we forget that that sometimes can be performative if we're not really getting into what does the depth of a relationship look and feel like to both participants.
As you were sharing that, Alissa, I just have a quick anecdote that I thought of when you were describing that. When my youngest was in first grade, there was a child in the classroom who used a wheelchair, and I came to volunteer for a Valentine's Day party. And the parent volunteers had all set up different games and activities for the kids to do, and it was getting pretty wound up in there. But one of the activities they were doing was musical chairs, and the kids were rotating through. And when it came time for this child who's in my child's classroom to take a turn, all the parents froze because they didn't think about how are we going to make this work for everybody in the classroom. Well, as the two parents were talking, the kids had already moved all the desks away and made more room. They had pulled chairs out and they had started to adapt and modify the activity by themselves. And I wish I could have filmed it because it was the most beautiful example of how that classroom teacher had set up her room to have that community of belonging where the children all knew what their friend needed. They figured out how to adapt the activity, I mean, without really even talking to each other. And so it was this beautiful testament what this teacher had created in that classroom. And the game got started. I mean, in just about a minute, they had already figured out how they're doing it, and then they moved on. It was incredible, but it really kind of shows that nuance and subtle thing that you see in a truly inclusive classroom where everybody experiences membership and belonging because the kids just know one another and they immediately want their friends to be part of what they're part of.
I love that. And that's the social environment that we create as educators, right? That what is the culture of the classroom? What are the ways that we do things around here? You know, what are our norms? What are our expected behaviors? How do we treat each other? All of those things don't have to be something that's by default. You know, it can also be something planned, and then it turns into something even greater. So I think about dandelions when I think about our field. Emily, you and I have talked about this before, but I'm a gardener and I have a favorite weed. I know you're not supposed to like weeds as gardeners, but but I like weeds because I think weeding is fun, you know, something to do outside. And dandelions are my favorite weed because they remind me of childhood. You know, I mean, everyone remembers that time of teaching a child how to blow the seeds off of a dandelion. And it's such a lovely experience and such a nice memory and fun for children, fun for us as adults. And I love that image because it reminds me of us as early childhood educators and the mighty force that we are. Just like a child blowing the seeds from a dandelion, we provide that same little push, that little puff of air that can make all the difference in the world for a child. And so our empathy, our understanding, our care can mean the difference between shame and pride for a child. And it's inclusion versus exclusion. And so I just am so grateful to have all of the fellow dandelions out there. You know, not only is it like us because of how we support children, it's also like us because dandelions are really, they're hard to get rid of. They can find any little crack or crevice, you know, they have a lot of spark and determination, just like our field as well. So thanks for letting us be a part of this. I don't know, Alissa, do you have any closing thoughts to share?
No, I love that. I think, you know, we all have to have a why. And I've never heard you talk about the dandelion, Jani. And I'm so grateful that I got to hear that today. Because I think, you know, our why is like spreading the beauty and the moment and the, you know, I love that. And I think we have a lot of reasons we're getting a lot of reasons in our field as to why we shouldn't do something, right? You shouldn't exclude because then your numbers on your indicator 6 data won't look good, or you shouldn't segregate because of this, or you shouldn't use disciplinary practices that are harsh because of. And I think that your story reminds us of our why. And our why is that we want to spread all that great stuff. It's not, we know those are common barriers to children developing affirmation, but really what we want to do is come from a different place, right? We want to come from that place of offering a spark or a breath or a puff that would really help children to grow and expand versus doing it because there's, you know, now a policy that says that we shouldn't do something. And I think when we come from that place, we're just way more likely to be successful. And And I love that.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to add on to the dandelion analogy once more, which is that in some communities, dandelions are seen as very valuable because they have medicinal value in your diet. And so I'd like to tack on that it also is good to remind us that our perspective and our mindset and our view is really what impacts what is valuable or considered valuable or not. So I really want to thank both of you for being here to help shed light on maybe clearing off our lenses a little bit to see the world in a more inclusive way. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.